Five, four, three, two, one. I'm John Miglash for the Wisconsin DMA and the International Society for Strategic Marketing, bringing you some good news in the midst of chaos. So let's dig right in. First thing I want to do is talk about America's miles returning. And it's pretty self-evident. This is back in February. And of course, in Wisconsin, we drive fewer miles because we are off the road half the time. But you can see it's climbing back up. Average miles per day traveled, 14. I did my 3 miles, as always, all the way through. I was one of these faithful drivers who got up in the morning and went to work. And I hope you were too. But not everyone can. So let's move on. Okay, so the big news in marketing today was what's going to happen with social media. As we pointed out yesterday, social media may not be all it's cracked up to be. The ROI may be way, way lower than you think. I would say so. And the tracking and attribution are awful because most of the time your ad has to be clicked to a landing page or some other response device where you don't know who saw it necessarily, and you don't know where it posted, what the context was, and you don't know where they came from when they came to your site, except in very aggregate, messy ways. And you may or may not, depending on how well you do it, know what ad they were even responding to. So what's ahead for social media? And this is from this is from The Hustle, and a really excellent article, really, really short. We translated the executive order from bureaucratese to English. Very, very good. I really like it. Okay, it's been a strange week. President Trump issued a tweet that said, mail-in voting has fraud potential. And Twitter replied, there is no fraud potential, which of course, or essentially required that there be no fraud potential. Potential is a funny word, all right? It's like there are no potential unicorns in the universe. One of the things you learn in philosophy is you can't assert a universal negative. Unless you've looked everywhere, you don't know if there's fraud, right? One of the tricky things about fraud and deception is you're deceived. It's hard to dig up. So, in essence, Trump was giving his opinion, and Twitter said, no, there is no fraud. And, of course, in the press briefing, they fired back with probably a dozen examples of fraud, and many of them tied to ballot harvesting and other innovations in voting other than showing up. But even when you vote absentee, you have to show up, and you have to show your ID, and you have to do a bunch of stuff, and you get crossed off. But Twitter's full of examples of people getting multiple ballots, dead people getting ballots going to the wrong state, even state. I mean, come on, you could at least do a zip code suppress on your mailing, for heaven's sakes. Plus, there's no real security on it because the ballots are made out of regular paper, printed on regular paper. They can be replicated easily, and so there is obviously a fraud potential. But Twitter decided to label it with a warning that this was deceptive. Now, see, the point isn't whether it's right or wrong and who's right. That's not the point. The point is they're both opinions. And Trump is saying to his followers on Twitter, he has some tens of hundreds of 150 million or something followers on Twitter, some crazy number. It's like a huge number. And he's using those, and he, is expecting them to get delivered. On the other hand, Twitter is using the fact that they own it. It's a private platform, and it's protected by Section 230 of something or other of the Bedrock Internet Law. And so, should private companies be regulated? Well, in the cases of monopolies, they often are. Utility companies are regulated. And The press is regulated to a minimal degree where they're required to put both sides up. And so if you think the press, your newspaper, your local TV station is just showing one side of an opinion, you're welcome to and encouraged to send a letter to the editor disagreeing. And if you challenge the FCC licensing process and say they are all too one-sided, and this is local news and newspapers mainly, because cable news has kind of found a loophole, I have to say, which is part of why cable news is so polarized, with basically two opinion sources. I think one side labels their opinion sources a little better, but both sides are certainly full of opinion. Anyway, so they kind of pay homage to the tradition that says opinion is opinion and news is news. But the Twitter, Facebooks of the world are granted a special liability force field. Okay, so here we go. There are two big legal issues in play in the order Trump signed: the First Amendment and a bedrock internet law known as Section 230. The First Amendment doesn't apply to private companies like Twitter and Facebook, but the order tries to redefine the platform's free speech designations or obligations anyway. Do they have free speech obligations? Section 230 was written when the best we had was bulletin boards. We had little bulletin boards, and they were encouraged not to encourage pornography and hate speech and other things that could be objectionable. Now, they had an interest in that anyway because, well, I had whitetail.com and it got hacked repeatedly and it ruined the site. I had thousands of messages about hunting, and then all of a sudden some looks like Russian, I don't know, who knows, looks like some Russian hackers started loading it up with pornography. I tried to remove it, but over time it got overwhelming. I had to take down the wonderful bulletin board. I was going to switch it to a more secure version, but it would not convert, and the site's never been the same. To be honest, it was wonderful. And so that's the kind of thing that happens. Now, what the law is essentially is a liability force field. It protects tech companies from being sued over what users post. So it says if I post hate speech or I post something objectionable, other people can't sue me because this is like the phone company. That was kind of the basis of it. The phone company can't get sued if you threaten someone on the phone or you do other crimes over the phone. You can use the phone to do crimes, and the phone company doesn't get in trouble. Okay? Now, the tricky part, and I listened to the entire press conference or whatever at the signing, the tricky part, Bill Barr says, is these are somewhat anachronistic, and once Twitter starts to be an editorializing platform, they are tippy-toeing into abridgment of free speech. Now, for the most part, pornography has limitations on free speech. It's not very much, but it is some. And there are some limitations on encouraging violence, etc. So, we're trying to move that a little bit, and there's bipartisan support for scrapping or redefining Section 230 since it is about almost 30 years old. It was designed to encourage tech companies to moderate discussions. So, the executive order narrows tech companies' protections. Once they play editor and start removing or restricting access to permitted content, the force field goes away. Seems kind of fair. It called for clarity from the FCC. Clarity on which moderation moves are out of bounds, that is. So can they take down people that simply have an opposing view, which seems like it's happening quite a bit. They seem to have different standards for one side of the news than the other. Maybe not, but the process is totally opaque. You can't tell what they're doing. It could clamp down on ad spending, specifically ad spending by government agencies on platforms that violate free speech principles. Oh, that's a little vague. I don't know what to say about that. And it includes federal and state reviews. The order says complaints submitted to the White House Bias Reporting Forum or form will be forwarded to the FTC, Federal Trade Commission, and the Justice Department. Calls for a working group to create model state legislation, unfair or deceptive practices. And of course, this can be abused. I know people who were put out of business because of deceptive practice rulings on sweepstakes, where they, for a long time, they required that they had a sort of safe haven that said an ordinary average person can recognize this, what's going on here. And then they took that away. And they just said it could fool someone. And as one of my friends who had this as part of his offers said, you can't fight someone whose business it is to put people out of business and can print money. So there's a danger here, and there's a second danger, which is that taming the discussions, they may apply a chainsaw rather than a scalpel. They may just ban everybody willy-nilly. Now, of course, to the extent that they do that, and oftentimes they're banning really popular people. James Woods gets banned regularly. And I kind of enjoy his tweets, but they are on the edge, I admit it. That's what we like about it. It's a tough deal. It's a tough deal. And I think, hopefully they should appreciate the clarification as well. But they could just, if they look at GDPR or they look at the ad rulings in the UK, it could be a disaster, as usual. So, we'll see, I guess we'll have to say. Now, so that said, I have 4 kids in Minneapolis who live in the city of Minneapolis. And one thing that everyone agrees is that police brutality is something that can be real. And secondly, that looting is not in anyone's interest. And in fact, it may reinforce exactly the kinds of profiling that are being objected to. So you have to keep it peaceful or something's going to happen. That said, and the coronavirus, and to me it's not clear what's going on. The deaths are dropping, but not precipitously, and things are opening up. But I thought I just watched a couple of videos, and we'll end with this, on the Blitz of London. This first one is about the early Blitz in 1940, and the second one shows more of the major Blitz. But the point I want to make is that after a few weeks, for the first few weeks, London shut down, totally shut down. And you have to admit, the bombs were dropping, and they didn't know how long it was going to go, but they didn't want to get bombed on. So they went to bomb shelters. And then, the Blitz was a change in German strategy where they had been bombing factories and basically leaving the population alone. And then they started bombing civilian population centers. And people had to decide what to do. And for the most part, after the first few weeks, they worked their jobs during the day, and then they went out at night and tried to fight the fires. And there's some great stories about fighting the fires inside St. Paul's Cathedral. Really great. And what I think has been missing in this coronavirus war is some of the spirit of the Blitz of Britain. So I want to share that with you today. Some of the spirit that this is a war. Life is a war. Nature is brutal and life is short. And we have to keep fighting. And it doesn't work to sit in our homes, even if it works to sit in our homes. It just doesn't work. So let's see what people did when the bombs were falling. Let's go over to that.
It's a breathe a night from her hair and take stock of the damage done.
This is 1940.
During the night. The sign of a great fighter in the ring is, can he get up from the floor after being knocked down? London does this every morning. I'm a neutral reporter. I have watched the people of London live and die ever since death in its most ghastly garb began to come here as a nightly visitor 5 weeks ago. I have watched them stand by their homes. I have seen them made homeless. I have seen them moved to new homes. And I can assure you, there is no panic, no fear, no despair in London town. There is nothing but determination.
And they're out and about.
And high courage among the people of Churchill's Island. And they know that every night the RAF bombers fly deep into the heart of Germany, bombing munition works, aeroplane factories, canals, cutting the arteries which keep the heart of Germany.
Okay, so they're fighting back, but watch this one. And we'll just close with this. Like and share if you want. This is 41.
Preceded by a shower of flares, German bombers rained fire and high explosive bombs in their most savage attack on London. Here again is the blood, the sweat and tears that Nazi warfare brings to the men, women and children of city, town and village. Here again are the same firefighters who face peril and danger with the same...
Estimates were 60% of the buildings in London were damaged or destroyed.
They fight the hell of Hitler's making. While
This
our
is not
cameramen
just
record
one
for
city
all
block.
time their stupendous task. Rocked by blast like some foul giant's breath, and blistered by the intense heat, London's firemen carry on. Here are heroes in action.
And they
Thick smoke
still...
hangs over the heart of Britain as a choking dawn reveals the terrors of the night. London has been wounded during the hours of darkness, but what colossal strength runs in her veins. As hoses still play on the smouldering ruins, a fireman is heard to say, "Blimey, he wasn't half cross with us last night." Let every honor be given to the rescue parties, nurses and doctors, who toil for hours among the wreckage, bringing help and easing the suffering of survivors. From out the bowels of devastation, they bring the injured to be ministered to by these gallant brothers and sisters of mercy. But in spite of it all, London carries on. Lummy, you ought to hear her carrying on. In no uncertain voice, she echoes Mr. Churchill's words, "We'll give it to them back." Yes, this time we take the gloves off. Hitler has called the tune, and we'll give it a name. Retaliation. Quoting an American newspaper, the indiscriminate orgy of destruction is not the weapon to defeat England. From the dust of London arises only new life and hotter defiance. Hardened and angry, Britain fights back. We've got an adapted slogan now. Can we take it? Sure we can take it, right back where it came from.
And, you know, that's not necessarily the only perspective we can have, but CNN, Fox, pretty much everybody seems to be agreeing this morning it's time to fight for America. So, get up, do your job, work through the night. That's what they did in the Blitz of Britain. I'm John Miglosh. Have a great day. Bye-bye.